Testing sound, testing audio, 1, 2. Testing sound, testing audio, 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing sound. Testing 1, 2. Testing sound, testing audio, 1, 2. Testing audio, 1, 2. Testing audio, 1, 2. Testing 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 1, 2.
Why can't we get the ceiling speakers working?
Testing 1, 2. I'm not the person to ask.
Huh?
Ask Steve.
Who's Steve?
He's the IT manager.
The what?
IT manager.
Oh,
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Testing. Testing 1, 2. 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 Hear me now?
If we get questions about your detailed budget deliberations, I'm not going to answer because I wasn't there.
Right.
I don't have any insight. I have insight into the public meetings you held because I was there,
All I have.
but I don't have deliberation
I don't
insight.
have behind the scenes deliberation. Well,
Iola's here, but he hasn't called in yet, 'cause so far, I'm gonna be running the meeting. I'm gonna be running the meeting, John had to go up to New York to take care of
They
his
call
job.
Hello, John, you there?
He's not there
No, he's
yet.
not there yet.
I just wanted to show you something. You're probably aware of this. I'm not trying to answer all your questions, but there's a lot of doors that you should know.
If there are some, then we can only collect it if the orders, but there's the original 12 donors. How much we collected?
This is section one. I did this bit for a while this morning.
Did you find there's some part in here that says the setting? Well, we owed about $2 million, give or take, $1 million, give or take. And of course, 12% of that each year is about $200,000. So we pay 17 for it. State limit is 8 feet, late fee is not a late fee. And then we charge, what it costs. If you don't pay, 14, 20,
I don't know how all this will work out, so I'm just saying there are a number I looked at that have this language.
what section is that?
I didn't print out the whole, this is your letter. I did this at 6 o'clock this morning. So I only went to that one, and there was one behind it, it was section 9. I didn't print out the whole thing, Joe.
I don't know why we wouldn't ask for it.
I don't know, Joe. I looked at that. It appears they just copied the
Anytime I've specifically looked, they've been the same. Now, I haven't sat down and read them end to end.
I've seen some that says the association may separate.
Did you look at the changes that were made to the deal?
These were the DRs in Illinois.
Well, the changes, that change allowed the board to set an interest rate remain in the DR change, 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
I don't know, Joe. These were filed. All I did was all I did this morning just to see what's the bill to a couple of DRs.
Okay, we looked at the OBA website. I would not take that as definitive.
Okay, well, I didn't know what to do at 5:20.
Why would you look at it?
Try to get an idea of whether there's something in the DRs. I don't see the top.
What?
If you are correct, then we need to
Yeah, it's
refund
weird.
a lot of money. I don't think we are. I think if you look, I think if you examine it, you'll find that there is changes to the
I saw that in a couple other DRs where it said
probably take,
Over the last 20 years, this could be $1 million.
I'm not saying.
This could be $1 million. Pete, I'm
I'm sorry? No, I don't. They were supposed to make me copies of some stuff, but I don't have it. The budget hasn't been. Karaoke, right.
I know. Hi, Joe.
far behind.
Yeah. Hi, Jim. I met you before.
Jeff Nipper.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you? I read your stuff on the forum. Yes. Seem well done for the most part. No, I am. This is as of yesterday or the day before.
Certificate in accounting, it's payroll. Well, that I dropped that idea, like, I got about 20 credits. But I'm interested in accounting.
He got ticked off.
It's it's boring sometimes. It's
He died.
people look for
And OPA.
common sense. Okay, accounting is often very arbitrary. There's a rule you do it this way because there's a rule you do it this way. Not necessarily that it's the brightest way to ever do it. It just, that's what the rules say. And the words generally accepted accounting practices or procedures are powerful words because they drive what the accountants do. It's called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. And if you're
Testing 1, 2.
John, yet?
No, not yet.
Call it to order.
Good morning. I want to call our meeting to order. I'd like to open with a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to thank you for coming to this meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to try to answer questions you may have about the budget. We are the budget, these people here are the members of the Budget and Finance Committee, not all of them, some of them are away. So I'd like to start with the ones that are here, introducing themselves to you. Mary?
Okay. My name is Mary Decker. I've been on the Budget and Finance Committee since November 2017, and I have been in management for 40 years, and I've been running my own IT system analysis and design company for 30 years. I'm hoping I can help.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Nepper. My wife and I live over in Colonial Village. I've been in Ocean Pines since 2006. We owned property before that, but moved here full-time in 2006. I have been on the Budget and Finance Committee for 2 days. So I'm new to this activity. I went to all the budget hearings, meetings, whatever this year. So I'm kind of aware of that part of the process. budget process is complicated, so. Anyway, I have a degree in business administration, concentration in finance, and I have a law degree, both from Ohio State University.
John?
John O'Connor, I've lived in the Pines for 22 years. I've been on this committee 14 of those 22 years. I think I'm on my last month or so here. And I had 30-plus years in banking and finance.
The members who are not present and they are out of state, and they were out of state on vacations and things like that, are Larry Perrone, Dick Keeling, Frank Brown, and Bob Kessler. Bob may show up a little later. I'm not sure, but he was out of state, but said he was getting back early this morning. Supposedly joining us by phone from New York will be the chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee, John Viola, who is also the OPA treasurer, and I'm waiting for him to call in to us on this conference room. My name is Gene Ringsdorf, and I'm the OPA assistant treasurer. The genesis of having this kind of meeting was recently at the board meetings, members had started to ask some questions that were along the lines of processes. What processes do we go through to develop the budget? And the board meeting has pretty full agendas, trying to squeeze a lot in, and it was suggested that the Budget and Finance Committee try to field some of those questions for homeowners. They can come to any one of our Budget and Finance Committee regular meetings. We decided to have a special meeting today to try to answer those questions because there was a number of recent meetings held by the board. But you are free to attend any one of our regular meetings, and I think the next one is scheduled to be next Wednesday. I believe it's at 8:30 over in the administration building in the conference room over there. I would like to, I don't know how many of you have seen the Ocean Pines Progress newspaper, which was produced after Saturday's board meeting. At that meeting, the board adjusted the assessments on the recommended budget. It is not the final budget. At this point, it's still a recommended budget. They had adjusted the assessment down into the range of somewhere between, I'll say 965, 970, which is we're currently at 951. The board is going to meet again on this Saturday to vote on the final budget and the final assessment. They're still trying to consider some other changes to the current recommended budget, and they will become apparent, I assume, at Saturday's meeting. But for now, the range is about 965 to 970. There may be changes upwards or downwards, but that will be determined Saturday. Since there's just a few people in the audience, I would like to change the schedule that I had here and ask you to come up to the mic, introduce yourself, and ask whatever questions on your mind about the budget or processes. We're not necessarily the ones that can answer should the amount be this or should the amount be that. That's for the board to decide, but certainly we can try to answer your questions, and if we can't, we will get back to you. So would you, if you have any questions, come one step forward.
Yeah, I got a question. The issue Joe Reynolds, 84 Watertown Road, the issue we talked about that you mentioned, the board, just by way of background, for a decade or 2 decades, the Ocean Pines Board of Directors has set an interest rate for unpaid assessments. That number generally in the last few years has run about $1 million per year. the board of directors currently, well, until it's changed, has been about 20% a year. The audited report from last year shows that we collected approximately $187,000 income from those unpaid assessments. This morning you mentioned to me that you looked at the OPA website and showed me the DR for Section 1, and you said it was the same for other sections.
No, I
Showing-
said Section 1 and 9, that's all I had a chance to look at.
or whatever it was, that indicate it was 6%. And that's what that DR originally said. However, the research did not go far enough. There was a change in the declaration of restrictions for all of the original sections,
Okay.
and I'd like to read it to you. Paragraph 12DB, which is the paragraph in point, I believe, shall be amended as follows. If
12
any
what, Joe?
such charges shall not be paid when due, it shall bear interest from the date of delinquency at the rate set by the Board of Directors at an open meeting in February of each year.
And what is that source, Joe? Resolution?
No, it's a change in the declaration of restrictions. Had you read further to the bottom of the DRs, you would find that a change was made to the declarations of restrictions.
I apologize, Joe.
That's all right. I got the date here somewhere. I mean, I just simply couldn't believe that we've been charging 20% without justification for the last
I couldn't believe it either,
20
but
years. But
I didn't have time to read them all, or go down and read all the declarations this morning. I was just,
at any rate, the declarations of restrictions provide exactly what the board is doing. The board is to set the interest rate
Okay.
in February of each year for the following year. Now, the board has set that rate, or intends to at any rate, based upon the last board meeting, at 6%, which is a change from 20%.
right.
At 6%, some people who know how to invest wisely might be wise not to pay their assessment. They could make more money in the stock market, perhaps. But at any rate, I hope that this is going to cost, we've had discussions relative to spending $6,000, $7,000 or reducing the assessment by $7,000. This is probably a $100,000 more impact on the assessment, on the assessment, as opposed to a $7,000, $10,000 impact, some of the things we've been discussing. It's not a trivial item by any means. And what bothers me is that the Board of Directors, I don't know if the Budget and Finance Committee was advised prior to the board making that decision. They said they were advised by their attorney that it was difficult to collect, or judges didn't want to give it. We've been collecting it. It's a matter of record. We've been collecting it. It's shown on our financial reports for the last 10 years or more.
I know that, Joe. I
So-
saw that. But
and-
I don't believe that the Budget and Finance Committee was consulted on that.
They probably weren't, which is not atypical, which is not, whatever. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We're still going to research it, Joe, and try to get back to you and the board, okay?
Gene, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you, Joe. Sorry, John. I can
Yeah,
hear
I'm
you.
trying to, I'm watching you on the video, so I'm trying to do both. But yeah, it's an excellent question on Joe's part. I did reach out to a board member. I am looking into it. Gene, you and I will work on it over the next day or two, and we'll definitely get back and get all the facts.
Okay, that's what we intended to do.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Joe just thanked you.
Okay.
John, we were in the, there's 4 people here in attendance, and I thought, you had some remarks that you wanted to make.
In the sense of just guide me as far as an agenda, or
Yeah, well, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk a little bit about the Country Club initiative, the reserves, and a couple of other items about the, the budget process not being
Okay,
finalized.
okay, I got it. Yep, I'm just working between the video and being on the phone, I got to adjust. So let's talk about the reserves, and what BNF has done and what we've done along with the budget process. And I got to say, on the forum, Joe pretty much has it accurate. As you know, Gene prepared in his work team a reserve forecast to go along with the budget so that we can track all the moving parts and balances. The one point I want to make, which Joe's made on the forum, is that the replacement balance forecasted at the end of the 1920 budget or year is approximately $3 million. And as we've given guidance throughout this, we've looked at that, and we don't want to go lower than that. Of course you can, but it is lower than we even gave guidance back in June, which I believe was somewhere around 22-28%, which would be around $4 million. Gene's schedule does show in a few years that we will get back up there, so we think with everything else, we're good with that, with the $3 million so far. But we are monitoring it. We did give the tools to the GM, finance lead, and to the board so that they can make their decisions, and that's pretty much where I would like us to be, giving them the tools, the guidance, and ranges. As far as the country club, I think it's pretty much been in the papers and everything where Ocean Pines is on that. And I just want to note on that we did update the reserve study forecast for any new numbers that we received from the GM on the country club, quad barn, police/admin building. Okay?
Yes. Do you have any other remarks, John, that you wanted to, or topics you wanted to discuss briefly before we go on to the questions from the rest of the audience?
We are working with the board. I don't want to say behind the scenes, but we were definitely working with them to analyze, review, and the GM to analyze and review to see wherever expenses can be looked at and certainly adjusted. But what I'd like to use the term, I'm hearing and reading everybody saying with the budget that they're cutting expenses, they're cutting the assessment. The stance that I'm taking in BNF is that we're trying to right-size the budget in the sense of some items may not have been in there on that January 4th day that needed to be in there. Some of them would increase the assessment, and others that we believe taking out, for instance, the infamous reviewing the 2.5%. So I'm looking at it, the term I'm looking at in BNF is we're trying to assist the GM, the finance lead, the board, and anybody else in right-sizing the budget. I'm good, Gene.
Okay, thank you, John. Anybody, next person in the audience that has a question, feel free to come up.
Hi, I'm Barbara Hines, 59 Brandywine Drive. This is a very basic question. I don't know much about the accounting. But I wondered, it seems to me that the budget is our projection on what we're going to need this year. Is that right? So in the history of Ocean Pines, can you think of how many times we've stuck to that budget? And if I realize there's profit and loss in certain situations, but can you think at times when would we not stick to the budget? Would that be an emergency thing or what?
That would be one situation, yes.
Can you think of times during these past 10 years, well, years that they haven't? I mean, if somebody just decides they want something, a group, and the board meets, don't they have to stick to the budget? You know, if the group wants something, don't they have to stick to the budget?
You want to handle that, John?
Basically, the budget serves, I guess, two purposes. It's a plan for what the association plans to do for the coming year, and it's also the only method to assess the assessment, to define what should be. In regard to your question about how much is the budget adhered to during the course of the year, which is basically what you're asking, Boy, that varies by board. Each board decides on its own. They should be following the budget as close as they can. Do they make exceptions? Yes, they do. Do they not spend money that's budgeted? Yes, they do not spend money that they did budget. They do spend money they didn't budget. So they are flexible enough, all right? And all boards try to keep within the budget or to not have a loss, all right? But that's, I think that answers your question. It depends on what the board wants to do and what the GM and the board together collectively think is necessary. If there is an emergency, of course, like they'll spend that money, but.
The classic example of the board not following the budget, and I would take issue with the statement that all boards try to follow the budget. Classic example. Board of Directors voted 4-3 to build a $1.3 million covered pool, unbudgeted. Classic. So the fear of association members that pots of money will be spent in unbudgeted, undesired ways is not only a reasonable fear, it's one that the boards in the past have shown that they will do. They will take that action. They will spend money unbudgeted based upon the whim or the politics of the time. $1.3 million is not a trivial amount of money to spend without a referendum. It was legal by our bylaws, but I think it was an insult to the association members.
Thank you, Joe. John Viola, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do want to touch on this, and just as far as where BNF is. But Gene, just let me make sure what Joe was talking about was the 1.3 for the sports core pool roof. Did I hear that?
Yes.
Okay, so I got it. Okay, so, and that's a good example. It's obviously before me or whatever, but one of the main roles of BNF and what we do every month, we're tasked with, is to review budget to the actual, to identify specifically, at least in my mind, those types of situations, to bring them to the attention of the GM, to the attention of the finance lead, attention of the board, and or whatever's necessary after that. So that is, I believe, one of the main tasks of BNF every month, and that's what we try to do. For instance, in this past year, the current year we're in, we noticed that consulting fees, legal fees were over budget already. We just had discussions with the GM. We did oversight. We actually tracked it. We alerted the board. It's part of the treasurer or assistant treasurer reports to the association. So we do try to do that. We are not, obviously nobody likes that type of situation, and we try to do what we can there from an oversight position and review.
Thank you, John. And Joe, I thank you for reminding me of that pool cover issue, because I remember that it was the same board who had approved a budget in February. Not one word or not $1 was mentioned about a pool cover by that board that approved the budget. And then in their first meeting in May, they start talking about the project, and I think it got approved 1 or 2 months later. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Good morning.
Jack Collins, Skyline Court. First of all, let me compliment you guys on putting forth the effort to do this. I mean, this takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you really have to dig into the job that is at hand, and that is giving the right kind of advice to the board directly, not through the GM, but directly to the board. And it takes a lot of time and effort, and you guys provide a very important function for the association. I also like to compliment John Viola for the tremendous job he's done thus far and how he has opened up this process and how he has diligently provided information to the association members on the actual numbers that we're talking about in terms of budgets. I just want to bring to your attention a little bit of history, and some of you will remember this. When I was elected to the board in 2013, that was the last year of a $50 increase in the association dues that was going to amount to $150 in additional assessments to each and every payer of their association dues. The 8,400 lot owners, I don't know what the delinquency rate is now, but in any event, we'll get there. The idea was, and it was a concept developed by a fellow by the name of Pete Gomzak, which I thought was a pretty good idea. What he did was he paid for the construction of the yacht club. And that's what this was all about. That $150 was about the yacht club. He paid, he set aside the money out of replacement reserves to build the yacht club, the $150, which, by the way, amounted to, when it was reached that level, $1.2 million each and every year, above and beyond normal assessment, $1.2 million. Once that took place, the yacht club was completed. By the time I left the board, which was 2016, my recollection is that there was a small payment to be made to pay off the yacht club bill or the yacht club construction expense, and that loan was terminated. That loan was paid off. During that period of time, each and every year on the board, with the exception of one year, the dues had to be increased for operational expenses, which I never fully comprehended. There was one guy who currently sits on this committee now, and that's Jeff Nepper, who worked very hard to lower that assessment, and he received support. I think it was a 5-2 vote. Is this dead? Okay.
You talk too long, Jack.
What, you want me to sit down?
No, wait a minute, wait a minute. Wait, we have somebody coming up. Hold on, Jack.
Just figures, that's what happens.
Thank you, Charlie. You want to put it in there? Okay. Hello.
Okay.
Anyway, Jeff was responsible for generating the support, and I think it was a 5-2 vote or something. There were two guys against it, but I was on Jeff's side. In any event, that was the only reduction from the last initial assessment of $50 to our membership base that we're paying that was ever made. $6, and it was $6 per person. Now you got to spread that over 8,000 people, and it gets to be a little bit of money. In any event, each and every year prior to and since that, there's always been pressure to increase the budget. Now, in the wisdom of the previous board that set up this, they called it the 5-year plan, that set this plan up, they said that future boards could either return that money back to, this is the way it was explained to me, return that money back to the membership in the form of reduced assessments, or they could put it into reserves to increase the reserve amount. But it was never really mentioned to me that we would use those funds to increase operational expenses. But operational expenses kept going up each and every year. And to me, that was not the purpose of that original assessment back to the folks. So what I would like to impress upon this August committee is that I think that we are a victim of baseline budgeting, the way our government works, in that we know that we have to spend X number of dollars because we spent it last year, and you know that costs are going to increase and salaries are going to be demanded, so therefore we have to increase the budget by X percentage. That's baseline budgeting. So you never go backwards. You always increase the assessment back to the association. What I was told that the most, and what I grew up in as far as corporate America was concerned, the most effective form of budgeting is zero-based budgeting. You rip it down every year. And I think that's where John Viola and you guys are going to go. I think that's what you're trying to do. And it's tough. It's very difficult. But that's what you have to do in order to be fair to the association. There are folks out there that say, well, shoot, $127, I can afford that. For every one person that says that, I will introduce them to 5 or 6 people that can't afford that $127, that are living on a fixed income, that are having some pressure put upon them. Their taxes are going up locally. And they are. They just are. Their taxes are going to go up locally. So what I'm asking you guys and ladies to do is to think about the folks out there in terms of future assessments, and let's start working on the concept that Jeff had at one time. I don't know if he still has it or not, but let's return some of the resources back, cash resources, money resources, back to the members, and that's where it belongs. He wants to know how they would return the money, lowering the assessments, like Jeff suggested. What was it, 3 years ago? Yeah, 3, 4 years ago.
Jack, you, if I may, you mentioned the $127 increase over $951.
Yeah, I heard it was 10. It's now down to 10 or something, right?
Yeah, it's a range. As of Saturday, it was around 966, 970, yeah. And the board is still deliberating on some stuff. And the board is still deliberating on the budget.
Yeah, and that's
they're going to have a meeting for Saturday.
And that's why I'm here. You know, just to remind you guys that you have a lot of influence on this board. I believe you do. Through John Viola, I think you have a lot of influence on this board, and I do believe that it is just not necessary to increase assessments. Not $1. I mean, $1.2 million each. Oh, if you want to get down to specifics, look at your reserve account. Your reserve account is pretty close to $11 million. Now, I understand that that has replacement reserves, which is about $6 million, and plus the bulkheads, which is about almost, what, $2 million or over $2 million. And then the roads reserve is the heaviest I've ever seen it, which is good. That's a good thing. All these are good things. I would do diligence on the expense side and think about how much money we really do have to reserve in order to keep this operation functioning effectively and efficiently. So, thanks. $10, yeah. Somebody told me $10. So that's why I'm here, though, that maybe you guys can even reduce that further.
And 47 of that, $47 of the reduction was the elimination of the road contribution in its entirety. Thank you, Jack. John, do you have any follow-up comment?
Yeah, I do. And again, I don't get everything that's being said, but I did hear a lot of what Jack said, and I do want to comment on it. First, he's right as far as how to go about the budgeting, at least from what I heard he was saying, whereas the guidance and the way it should be reporting and the way to see it as CFO, I would like to see this is, okay, we had last year's budget, and then we compare those departments this year to last year. We did have a deficit recovery in there last year. I wanted that broken out separately so that it doesn't wind up being embedded into the assessment where people may not realize it and then gets utilized for something else. So I did want that broken out. It is now being broken out so that we can see it and the board can render their decisions on it and whether or not they want to increase it or decrease it. So, and then you start with that baseline, I use this term budget, but what I call all the departments and everything from last year, and then you put in as separate line items so everybody can see. For instance, if the board, which they did this year, they wanted deferred maintenance, well, if that number is 200,000, instead of embedding that in the beginning, you break out that 200,000 so that the board and everybody can see what the impact is on the assessment as you start out. Same thing with merit raises. You can break that out, or you can put that one up fine either way. But you tell everybody it's 2%. I would break it out and then put it in once agreed upon. The roads, the bulkheads, all separate so everybody can see it. And then you can make a judgment. This way also, we knew last year $71 was for deficit recovery. I just didn't want any of that being embedded into the regular assessment, which easily happens. John O'Connor could talk about that. Him and I have talked about it much in the past. So that's the way we approach it. I believe in zero operating growth at a certain level for a certain point, at least to start with, and then you go from there with where you break out where you can. So I think that answers a lot of the question there. Anything else that I missed there that I should touch on, or if anybody has any questions I have pointed made?
Jack is coming back up. Okay, Jack.
No, but in reference to the money that is going to be allocated toward, you know, the inefficiency of creating a shortfall in, you know, revenues under expenses, what is that particular figure? What is $1.6 million? Is that what the number is?
That was the original numbers.
The original number, yeah.
It's down to one.
The original, and it's now $1 million?
Yeah.
Well, is that separated out so the folks can see that coming down like it was for the yacht club? I think that would be very useful, you know, to set up that side account and show how the money is not going into reserves, it's going into the reduction of that particular debt.
Right.
That makes sense
That's
to me.
exactly what John said.
Sir?
That's exactly what John Viola said.
Yeah.
To make sure that we keep it separate,
Yeah, but
so it's accountable.
But you remember, John, that there was a separate category where that yacht club debt was shown each and every month until it was reduced the following year, and it rolled down. I don't think we're doing that with the 1.6 million original shortfall. And that's what I'm suggesting, that maybe we should show that as, even if it's not on the reserve report, just as a sidebar.
It's not the reserve, but the assessment breakdown will show you how much is going toward the recovery of the loss.
Okay.
Now, that can change from year to year, depending upon, pray tell, we wind up with a profit at the end of the year that would offset the deficit and not necessarily have to be included in future assessments, right?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, good job.
So yeah, John O'Connor, Gene, so part of the answer to it, Jack, and I understand he wants it broken out, we do that, and we have made sure that $600,000 this year, the $71 of deficit recovery, went against the deficit. We see it, you would be able to see it, I believe, on the detailed balance sheet in the equity section. I know I went through this with Marty and Steve when we booked it to make sure. So we do review it. We know it's there. I had the finance lead book it from the beginning so that if we did have a loss this year, it wouldn't get intertwined, and we can certainly can see it or address it if it does happen. So we do it. You may not see it clearly on a financial, but it is there, and we do check it. And I will make sure that that does not happen, along with John O'Connor and everybody else on that BNF.
I have one final comment, and that is they ought to hire this guy. instead of he being a volunteer, he should be paid for what he's doing, because he's doing a yeoman's job. And by yeoman, I mean really getting into the nitty-gritty, the detail, and makes good common sense. You don't work cheap, do you, John? Huh?
John Viola,
John.
talking to you.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking, what's the question?
He is saying you're doing such a yeoman's job that you should be paid for what you're doing, and then he asks, you don't work cheaply, do you?
He's working for
I know, he's working for nothing, he should be paid for what he's doing.
They added a lot more zeros before and
Yeah, I
after
think
his
he needs
current.
I think Jack's saying in another life, he's right, in another life, but,
Yeah, he is. Thank
I
you, Jeff.
understand.
And we all agree that John Viola is doing a great job.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Budgets are an interesting thing, and you can use them in a couple of different ways, which are arbitrary. Some organizations in this country, typically governments, have limits on changes to budgets. So the law says in some of those jurisdictions, you can't overspend the budget, there are a bunch of things you can't do. Obviously, that doesn't apply to the federal government, who has a different approach to it. But the other approach with the budget is to use it as a guideline and to have the suggestion that you should follow it, but of course, if there's something really important, it's an exception. And when you have that discussion, nobody really talks about real big-time emergencies that come out of nowhere. Those may require spending that aren't in the budget, and you have to do it. Don't like it, but you have to do it. So set those aside for a minute. We could decide in this association to use the budget as a limit. And if something is out of the budget, great idea, let's write it down, but you can't do it because it isn't in the budget. Remember, emergencies were set aside. We could do it that way. That's not what we do. We sort of try to follow the budget, and I think boards that I've watched over the years, some of them have made a decent effort to do that, and some not so much. That's kind of the way we set ourselves up. And there's wording in bylaws or DRs or somewhere that talks about the fact that the board can change the budget. So maybe we're skipping an administrative step here and there because they don't take the action of changing it, but they go ahead and change it by de facto because they spend the money anyway. I think we ought to have that debate to look at the pluses and minuses of doing it one of those two ways, and then make sure we pick one in the clear and then follow it, whatever it is. If we want to put a limit on it, fine, let's follow it. I worked for a commercial corporation that had no statutory or any other kind of limits. They had internal limits. And when you went to spend money, the finance guys would come up and say, where's the money in your budget? And if you could point to it, they'd write the check. And if you couldn't, they wouldn't. And I couldn't write that, those kind of checks. Now, I'll grant you the numbers in that corporation were stunning compared to OPA. So we were talking billions, not, tens. But the principle is the same. You either limit it and follow that, or you don't. And it's about time we talk about that, decide what we think is best for this association, which may be to continue what we're doing. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know we ought, in my opinion, we ought to have that debate, make the decision, and then do it, whatever we decide. So you can use them both ways, budgets, and there's probably a third way I haven't thought of, but you can use budgets in a couple of different ways.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Good points, Jeff, but we can control, the board can control what it spends unbudgeted, but we cannot control the spending overall. For example, the board has no way to control the losses at the yacht club, for example, or the profits at the yacht club. It's an unknown at some point. So we can, there may be a way to limit the board's spending on new capital in some way, but other than that, I'm not so sure we can control that the budget is met every year. Getting back to the actual budget for this year, two things. One individual stood up at a budget hearing of some sort and suggested that OPA give away some sort of free coupon. One person. Not exactly a deluge of demand. I read in the paper now the board's talking about giving away some kind of a coupon. So we're going to collect the money, we're going to reduce the assessment, but we're going to give people something. I'm not so sure how that works. I believe our treasurer questioned whether or not we should be doing it for food service or not, which I would strongly suggest we do not. You want to give somebody a round of golf or a free day to play tennis or something like that, no big deal. But I don't think we ought to be handing out $20, $25 coupons to every association member to go drink at the yacht club. I hope the committee would recommend the board not do that. The other issue I wanted to bring up is this idea I've seen promoted of suggesting we reduce the assessment by increasing the profits we're going to make at the yacht club.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Joe? I didn't hear it.
That we can reduce the assessment by increasing the profits, projected profits at the yacht club. I think we've been down this road before and it hadn't worked out very well. Sort of like counting your chickens before they're hatched. If history has shown us anything about the yacht club, it's things don't always turn out the way we think. To be frank, I believe while many people had their hair on fire over that proposed $127 assessment increase, and now it may be back to zero, and there's talk of maybe we'll make it less than last year, I'm not convinced that's the right thing to do. As an association member, I'm totally unable to examine that budget, $13 million, and to tell with any kind of surety that we are operating in our basic operational system at an efficient way. I have no way of knowing that. If I assume that we are operating at an efficient way, then I must say, why are we reducing the assessment? Were these other things not needed? I gave an example of something I wrote the other day about Granby Road. Those people have been flooded every time we have a decent rain. Every time, for years, for decades. To my knowledge, there's not a nickel in this budget to fix that problem. It's a known problem. The solution is known. We talk about people living on fixed incomes that can't afford $127 a year increase. Here's people getting flooded out. These are the people that are suffering. The projected balance at the end of 2020, based on this current budget, I believe in the replacement reserve budget is about $3 million. It's one of the lowest amounts projected in maybe a decade. Generally, it stays around 4, so it's a nebulous item. I agree. You know, people can agree to disagree about how much we should have. Personally, I'd like to see it stay at around $4 million minimum. But I don't know. It just seems to me that the budget is not a financial document. It is a political document.
Are audience members who have a question or other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
I just have one question about what deferred maintenance is. I heard John say something about 200,000 for deferred maintenance, and I just wanted to know if you can give me a definition of what we use that for.
Deferred maintenance is basically catching up on maintenance we didn't do in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years that we should have done. So they're at least addressing the negligence of past maintenance on our facilities. That's usually.
You mean like a new roof or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or whatever it is that they didn't do that they should have done. Yeah.
okay. Will that be something we stay with?
Until we catch up.
Okay.
There's classic examples. This building here became a new building because of deferred maintenance on the old one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Classic examples will be the yacht club, and now the country club is a classic example, and I guess the next one on the list will be this craft shop out here. If you look at it, it's crumbling because not doing the maintenance. So that
Okay.
they're at least making a special attempt at it.
Okay, so now, in the future, we're going to maintain all these buildings and not let them go like the country club, right?
I
Is that what that's
certain-
all about?
I certainly hope so.
Okay.
We're going to do a better job.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Boggs, 8 Federal Hill. I'm the Assistant Treasurer in the Park and also on their Budget and Finance Committee. And my question is how the process works to determine your budget. I'm involved with the budgets over there. We have all of our committees and all of our departments hand in their recommendations early in the process. We go through that. We determine what's necessary, what's not, and then we come up with a budget that we present to our board. They have the final say on it, but the change in the budget from what we give them is minor. I don't understand how you can go from having a $127 increase down to 0 if we did all of our homework on that. So that's my question. In your process of how much you have input from your different departments, how you go line by line through it, and how we come to the amount where it's $127 different from one budget to the next.
Started out at 0, went to 127, now it's going back to 0.
Oh, no, I understand. I just don't understand how, if you've done your due diligence on it, that there would be that much of a difference.
All right, Gene, I'll try to answer that, Trine. The overall process, which you have to remember a couple of things. Number one, our fiscal year starts May 1. By September, this committee gets together and gives a recommendation to the Board of Directors as to what they should be asking the general manager to do in preparation of the budget for the following fiscal year. From September through about December, the GM usually meets with all his department heads and drafts a budget and puts out the first cut, usually around Christmas or just right after the holidays. At which time, sometime in January, this committee takes 2 or 3 days and sits down with the general manager. When the GM proposes his first draft of the budget, goes to the Board of Directors and goes to this committee. We take about 3 days, 2.5 to 3 days to sit down with the general manager and the department heads to review item by item by item on the budget. And many times there's obviously like an audience. The people are welcome and board members attend. And we have discussions about what is and isn't in the budget, et cetera. After that session, we make a recommendation to the board about what they should do with the proposed budget from the GM. They then meet with the GM, review it, and then subsequently have another meeting. He makes the last changes, and then they vote on it. This year, the initial budget came in with 0 increase in assessments. A lot of discussions went on, and somehow things that got discussed, and from that it came $127 increase, and then there's been further discussions, and it's back down to whatever it's going to be. So, the process seems somewhat convoluted this year, and I don't really know why, but that's the overall the process and the involvement of this committee. It's the board that has the final say as to what specifically goes in the budget. And I don't know anything else to explain anything else that goes on, you know.
Well, my question is, if you did your homework in the beginning and you came up with a 0, and now all of a sudden the change goes to 127, and then we go back to 0, I don't understand if you did all your homework in the beginning and came at 0, why then it got changed to 127 up?
Gene?
Go ahead, John.
Gene?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
John.
and first of all, the gentleman's question is an excellent point or question, and something that we need to definitely address. So look at it this way. Look at it as a menu where pretty much everything that, whether it was a wish or a want, was listed. And now the board is trying to decide whether or not they have the money, or I heard somebody mention something about political and budget, and I'll put a check mark next to that, on whether or not they feel we can spend that. When you have several board members stating in the paper that they will not approve anything but a no budget increase or no assessment increase, then they subtract from it. For instance, the roads is prime. And a lot of people on the roads feel that we don't need to spend any money. So at one point that 47 was in there. Look at it as an option. At this point right now, the board has decided we're not going to spend that money this year, nor do we have to. We have X amount of money to spend, and we're going to spend it somewhere else. So there's an example of why it could go from a number like 127 down to another number. There's several other items there, a payroll adjustment. But I like to go back to a root cause of what causes something like that or whatever. And that's why, from a reporting standpoint, from a transparency standpoint, the way I would like to see the budget reported from the very first time out there would help with that, and everybody would be able to see it and see that it's broken out into a number. And then they can decide whether or not to take it, out or in. Now, I think I heard you say, you're right. Now, some of that should have been decided before, or maybe could have been in earlier discussions. The way it all unwinded this year, that's what happened. But I do understand your point. Hopefully I answered it. If not, when I'm down there, I will definitely spend more time on it. Did that answer it, though?
It's Gary, but yes. I still don't understand, if you've done your homework early on, why all of a sudden it goes up and then it goes down. I don't understand that part of it.
Right. So there was a payroll adjustment that was in the original 951 that you received, that we received on January 4th. That payroll adjustment, which was a substantial amount of money, is now out. So when you take something out at this stage that was in there throughout the process, that would reduce the number. Look at it as a menu, and the board is looking at several different options that might have stayed in there to a certain point, and now they're either taking some out or maybe even putting something in that, not seeing much of that, but that could have happened. It's not the way I would do it, but at the end I think we'll get there. But you're right, it has to be explained to anybody how this number can fluctuate, and I do understand that question. Hopefully I answered it.
We have salaries at the park that we control also, and we still don't have this large of a difference between 0 to 127 to 0. So
basically, the only thing I can think of to give you an answer is, from the initial budget proposal to get to the 127, the board added a whole lot of things into it and told the GM, will you please go determine what this impact is going to have? And I think that shock has caused them now to let's start taking out some things we thought would be nice to have and don't have, et cetera. So I think that's how we went from 0 to 127 to whatever it's going to be ultimately.
Go ahead, John.
All right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Right, and that's why I want to utilize the term I started off the meeting with, right size, and that's the way I look at this now, what this process is. And again, I'm just working with it. I hope next year it doesn't go this route. But at the end, it will be there, but it's right sizing in the sense that, you know, there were items that weren't in the original proposal on January 4th that need to be in there. I can tell you, you know, just an example, fire department, or there's a couple others, but they needed to be put in. And then the board's looking at, okay, well, maybe we don't need to spend the money on the roads, or we don't need to spend money on something else, or now's not the time for a payroll adjustment. So what we're trying to do with the reconciliation, I know the finance lead is doing with the GM, is we're asking for a detailed reconciliation to get from those different numbers you're hearing. That's the best I can do right now, based upon the way this unwinded. Hopefully, it's not the way I would do it either. You know, we're just trying to work with it, and hopefully next year everybody looks at it a different way. But at the end, it will be, you know, hopefully right-sized.
There was a premise in your question that I thought was interesting. You talked about doing your homework up front at the start. And that may be partially responsible for the problem that we have. I understood, now at this point, remember, I'm a member of the association, I'm not on this committee. Early in the process, the general manager made a clear statement in public that he didn't really consult with the department heads. Now, I wouldn't take that literally because I don't think he didn't talk to anybody, but I do think there was not enough engagement of those people. And if you want to understand who understands the current numbers the best of anybody here, guess what? It's the people doing the work. Okay, now, they may or may not have a good view of the future, so we probably have to merge some of that with what they do. But I don't think we had enough engagement of the department heads to start it out. And I think that's what led to the zero budget initially. People looked at it and said, no, we have these other things we got to put in, take out, whatever. They did that. Bingo, now you've got a number. At that point, I suspect folks looked at the number and said, holy cow, we got a problem with that. And so you start, at that point, what do you do about it? Well, the only thing you can do about a big number that you don't like is make it smaller. Okay, so you then go through a process and do that. And that, I think, has gotten us the bounce around this year. And a part of the problem, in my view, remembering I was just an association member, is that I don't think we had enough engagement of department heads early on for that first budget, the one that kind of starts everything. And under our documents, the general manager is charged with producing that first shot document. I think because we believe, and I happen to agree with this, that people on boards of directors and the like are better at editing what they look at than they are creating from whole cloth. Now, that's not always true, but I think it is true to some extent. And so if you give them a concrete proposal, like it, don't like it, you can work with it. You can figure it out. This goes in, this goes out. We do this. If you walk into a room with most people and say, okay, create from whole cloth what you want, everybody's going to go, I've seen groups of very intelligent people have a terrible time with that question. And whatever the subject matter of it is, they can't do it. So I think a lot of times we're better off creating a target to shoot at or target to review. So that part I kind of like. I would have preferred more engagement. So I think we kind of missed that assumption that you had in your question, which is a very good one. So, and at least from a starting point, maybe even looking at the future, but recognizing that they absolutely know more about what they're doing today than about what they could be doing sometime in the future. They just have better insight into that, I think.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
Just a couple of comments from my perspective about this year's budgeting process. This is probably my 8th or 9th budgeting process that I've lived through. I will say it's probably one of the roughest ones I've been through. Part of the problem, I think, this is from my perspective personally, haven't polled the other members, but we as a committee, the data that was supposed to be supplied to us by a certain date was not supplied in a timely fashion, and for us to review it ahead of time before we started the scheduled interviews and so forth with the department managers while we were at the meetings to review the data. We were being handed data. And so it was a little, I guess, a little bit rougher handling than it has been my experience in the past. And I would like to get back to a point that Joe made about he's never sure if, or one is never sure if we are operating efficiently. And to that point, Joe, I believe this committee, not only this year in its guidance, but in previous years in its guidance to the board, has told the board we would like to see budgets developed with key performance indicators and see the performance measured against those standards so that we can determine better than we can just by looking at dollar numbers. We can determine whether they are being spent in an efficient manner. But in some cases,
For that 15 years ago.
yeah, I know, Joe, and
At least.
back in 2004, I made a proposal to have performance-based budgeting put into effect here in Ocean Pines. But that the board actually agreed. They actually wanted a pilot program to start, but then didn't support it. The following year, the next board said no, so nothing ever happened. And we did the same thing in 2008 with an ad hoc committee. Developed all this performance-based budgeting things and started some classes. Then the next year, the board just forgot about it. So,
Joe, you're right. Over the 14 years I've been on this committee, we pretty much have asked for very similar things every year in our guidance. The problem is our audience changes every year. I mean, you have a new board that comes in, they get elected in August, the budget's already finalized. They're asked sometime in January or February to review the budget for the following year. So the management preparing a budget in the fall, that's not going to take effect until the following May 1. But you have a new board and it changes all the time. And this committee, because of the background of most everybody that's been on it in the 14 years, pretty much goes along with the same sound fiscal policies in budget preparation. All right? But you're right. We've been saying things for this long time, and the board changes every year. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I hear what you say, John. Somebody once told me early on in my career that if you can't measure it, it didn't happen. Now, that's not literally true, but there is truth in the statement. And those things are called metrics. And what they are the data that indicate how your whatever is running, your department, your association, whatever. How is it running? And if you're clever, you use the things that the people who are running it look at as your metrics. And you don't set up very many. Okay, I've seen people try to manage 50 metrics. I mean, it's absurd. There are about 4 or 5 key indicators in a group, department, company, association, whatever, that will tell you how you're doing. And they vary. The indicators that you would find in Public Works are nowhere near the same indicators you'd find in golf or aquatics or anywhere else. I mean, they're all different. We're starting to realize that those are useful, although I will tell you, they are a pain in the rear to set up. The first time you start using metrics, it's a real pain. Once you figure them out and you get used to the repetitive reporting of them, they happen. And they're not a big deal, and they're very helpful. So we're starting to get some interest in staff members, department heads, in producing metrics for the first time, using them to run their business, and at some point we'll get some reporting of those in a more organized fashion. If you look at the business plans that were produced this year by, I think, virtually every department head, if not everyone, there's a line at the bottom, the title is metrics, and below it are the metrics. What are the things they're going to look at? Percentage of this, dollar amount of that, time that it took to do this, whatever they are. And I believe those business plans also have the target, the goal that they're shooting for in the metric. Not only do you need the metric, but you ought to know whether 1 is success or 3 is success, or whatever the number is, because it'll make a huge difference. If you don't know that, you'll get confused. So they're starting to do that. In my experience, it'll take a little while. This is not an Odyssey project. This is not a 10-year deal. But it'll take a couple of cycles to get it started, and then a couple more to kind of get people used to it, and then you can sit back in it, and it runs as a semi-automatic in the gathering stage, but very useful business process as you try to run your organization. So we're looking at it. We're going to try to do it. I think. The actual decision's up to somebody else, maybe. Some of the department heads started doing it before anybody really said this was a good idea. I mean, they just looked at it from a business point of view and says, this stuff's helpful to me. And then you figure out how to report it, because if it's helpful to them, it'll be helpful to us on the committee, it'll be helpful to the board, it will be very helpful to association members. And if it's the same data that's getting reported, the overhead to produce the report that shows members is close to 0. You print another copy of the slide and give it out, or whatever. So you don't have to set up this whole different process and collect a bunch of weird numbers. Use the same stuff you use every day to run the place. I just show it to you and then explain it. The movement of indicators is probably more important than the actual data. Are they going up or down? And what does that mean? Because up could be great and down could be great. Depends on what the indicator's doing. So you kind of got to put some perspective around it. And if we're showing it to association members, we got to tell you that, because it won't be obvious necessarily. So we need to tell you this is good, this is not good, and why.
In my prior life, in my prior life, we would say magnitude and direction of the metrics. Are they going up or are they going down?
That's right.
Okay. Ma'am, You've been sitting patiently here for the whole meeting. Do you have any questions? Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
You know, I think one of the purposes of this meeting was to talk about the process. The process this year has been abominable, and I believe it's the fault of the Board of Directors by their denigration of the general manager and accusations that he did not do the process correctly. I don't know all the ins and outs. Mr. Knepper just made reference to something to the effect that he did not engage with the department heads enough.
That's what he said.
And yet, he just stated subsequent to that, and referenced business plans produced by every department head. I'm not so sure how department heads can produce business plans at the suggestion of the general manager, and then at the same time say that the general manager had no input or interaction with the department heads. This year has been most unusual. I'm not saying that the general manager has done everything perfectly, but his job is to produce a budget. He produced the budget. Now, some may not like the way he did the budget, but that's his job, and he produced it. And he said there'd be zero increase in the assessment. Now, when he said that, nobody got all excited. It wasn't until this committee met or had its hearings and a lot of suggestions came up. For example, the aquatics department came in with a very extensive business plan, very well done. One of the items in that, which was not in the original budget, was a $200,000 capital expense for a party room up at the pool. This committee recommended putting that in there. That was in addition. There was the issue of road depreciation, $400,000. I believe the committee and then subsequently the board. So all these things were added, and then the additions that this committee wanted and the board wanted ended up increasing the assessment by $127,000, or $127. So when the board announced that, the GM came back and said, well, all this stuff you want to add is going to add $127. Everybody went nuts. Started blaming the general manager. He's the worst guy in the world. How could he ever do this? Something's wrong in the process, and I don't think it was with the general manager. I don't think the general manager ignored department heads. I think he talked to department heads. I think the department heads had input. Some may think it wasn't enough. I don't recall exactly what he said when he said he didn't talk to department heads, but I believe if you go back and look at it in context and ask him what he meant as opposed to what was blasted across the newspapers and so on, I think you'll find something very different. He communicated with the department heads. The department heads came in and sat with him at the table when you guys met with him. I mean, to say he had no input from department heads is just not correct. But anyway, the process this year, very unusual. Maybe the GM was somewhat at fault, but I think the primary fault with the process this year has been outspoken members of the board of directors going after the general manager, and now even leaking, in violation of the code of ethics, leaking information to local media about the board going to sit down and vote on a no confidence vote and fire the general manager. The board is at fault here, no question in my mind.
Do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, I'm just gathering my thoughts. Look, I hear the point. It certainly could be, let's call it a point. Let's just step back. First, I'm not going to let the board talk for themselves. As far as the process and everything, you know, items were brought up but items also were not in the original budget. And I'm just looking at this as lessons learned, not pointing at anybody. But definitely at the end of this, everybody has to look at it, lessons learned, and go back and reflect and adjust accordingly. What we started with was missing several items in that budget, which would have increased the budget. Look, whether it was no assessment or whatever, it doesn't matter. And I'm not totally sure if that is, look, I don't know what the board's saying. That would you'd have to talk to them. As far as from BNF, we wanted it transparent. I'm not saying anybody did it intentionally or not intentionally. There was a certain way to do it. Certain items should be in there. Certain items should have been reduced, maybe. I mean, that's up to them. I just wanted it transparent on and clearly reported. So I know, Joe, you're not saying BNF, and that's fine either way. As far as the end result, the board will have to answer that. The way it just transpired, I think everybody lessons learned. I don't know this part about, and I did read the paper, I'm up in New York, about as far as what's going on. I don't know, but I know everybody's working hard on and putting in the hours to right-size the term I'm saying, whether it's the GM, the finance lead, BNF, myself, the board. That's all I want to say in here. The rest, I can't answer. Hopefully, we're all working as one team.
I did receive, or we did receive, a few emails that were solicited to be submitted prior to the meeting. And the one email was from Joe Reynolds about the interest rate reduction on delinquent assessments being changed to 6%, when in prior years we were using 20%. Joe has discussed that earlier here, and we will still be looking into it further, Joe, for you. There was a question from Marty Clark that was submitted to us about the payroll increase of 700 and whatever we had down here, $706,000 increase. He thought it was not appropriate. John, I know that you have had discussions with Marty one-on-one about his question on the $706,000 payroll increase. Do you care to elaborate, or just do you have comments about your discussions with him?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but let's just break down that situation. And a legit question by Marty or anybody else. Marty did bring it up during the BNF review. So here's all the pieces that are involved. Obviously, we started with what the payroll was today. There would be a merit increase. Let's take that as one column. The merit increase, which was the guidance was 2% from the board back in September or whatever in BNF. So that would be an increase. That increase, oh gosh, no, I think it's just, let me use rounded numbers. I don't have exact. That would be 75,000 to whatever the payroll. Yeah. So let me just do this, and then you can correct the numbers. I don't have anything in front of me. So that would be one item. The next item in there was originally, if you go back to January 4th, there was a payroll adjustment. Payroll adjustment was to get to market, right? And you've heard the board speak about that and whatever. That was around 125, 128,000. So that 128 and 75, whatever, that brings you to 200,000. In the schedule that was handed out, there was a big number that I thought I heard the GM and or finance lead, it might have been the finance lead during BNF review, state that was the salaries to support the increase in revenues that would be happening at the yacht club. So he had on that schedule that everybody's looking at a salary increase to support the increase in revenues and work and whatever. So that was a big number. I don't have the number in front of me, but that was a big part of it.
It was roughly, John, it was roughly about 230,000.
Yeah, and the reason I'm not saying it though, Gene, is I've seen so many different schedules with different numbers on it for that.
Yeah, roughly.
That this involved. So that was,
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, yeah, it does, it's a range, but, yeah, it was for like.
Yeah,
about a
okay, so if you have the schedule, just tell me, the recent schedule you have, was there what other columns were on there?
Let me get it.
So while he's looking for that, what happened here was there were many numbers in there that could be explained. Maybe they were explained, the people missed it. That definitely need to be explained again if this question continues. Obviously now the payroll adjustment is out. The merit increase is still there. Normally you would just see last year's payroll, the merit increase, and then if there was any change in FTEs or any type of promotions or whatever. This year there were other items in there. Gene, anything else on that in that schedule?
Yeah, it was, the variances were like, for the yacht club was 237,000, but a lot of that was related.
Okay, that's where I got that number
Yeah,
from,
that
right?
was related to the, primarily to the $670 or $17,000 revenue increase that was generated. And there was an increase that represented a part-time IT associate of about 28,000. I think that was to assist with the conversion to the new North Star system. And there was about, excuse me, $60,000 for that represents an HR position that was added. So there were a number of items like that. Let me see down here.
All right, so the bottom line, they didn't have the lump sum in there for the benefits.
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's not on the square. Okay, but the bottom line is this: there's many different items on there. There was a schedule, obviously. Maybe that, I recommended that because there were questions still coming in on it, that maybe we repeat that, or somebody, or if they want us to review it and present it, it's fine. But I just thought that needed to be explained more. There certainly is a schedule, as you see, Gene has it. There's a lot of moving parts. It's still moving. That's when there's moving parts. Sometimes there's a little bit of, maybe it just has to be reiterated and explained again. It's the best I can do there.
Okay, yeah, all right.
It's just, it's not all, and again, that piece for the yacht club, obviously that has to be explained, it has to be reviewed, it has to be understood, make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, and there was
so it's not just all payroll, it's not just all, salary increases. There's different components there, and some of them maybe wasn't presented that way in other situations or whatever.
Yeah,
Needs more communication, that's my opinion.
Yeah, there was about $25K for drainage labor, increased for drainage labor to do the drainage projects.
Right.
So, at any rate, Marty's question, we will answer. He said he could not be here today. We will break it out further and give him an answer.
The GM and the finance lead, and if they want us to get involved, we certainly will, and we'll be glad to assist in any way we can. Okay.
And there was a question I received from Tom Stouse. You received, rather, I think, and we both received it from Tom Stouse. And his questions, there was a number of different questions. He had about 6 or so questions on his letter. Do you want to address those, or do we want to get those answers to him after the meeting. I think some of these are going to require some lookup stuff. John?
So I'm just trying to find it so I can open it up on my
okay.
other computer because I'm
Gotcha.
looking on this one. If you want to read them, just highlight just whatever I can.
Okay,
address them.
all right. The
I'm trying to
one was
find it
a
on the other computer.
Slobodan Trend, this is from Tom Staff. Slobodan Trendick mentioned that the GM is currently being paid $7,000 more than his contract allows.
Okay, I got that one. All right, let me just, unless everybody wants to hear the detail now, I don't want to, okay, let's just, that question did come up during the board meeting. Slobodan did ask that question, Director Slobodan, on Saturday. He did ask me, the answer I gave, and I'll give more detail on this because I started looking at it. I have the contract here with me, but here's the thing. The GM was, again, this is just top of my head, the GM was hired at a salary. I know that when I came back from the back injury last year, in one of the months, I saw an increase in payroll. And I say, during the BNF questioned it. We were told that the GM, as part of the contract, and I did look at it, received a bonus of, I think, $10,000. So that's why there would have been this increase in the salary. So that was something we knew about months and months ago. I didn't know if he got a salary increase. I have to go back and look at the contract. Probably also a salary increase since he was there a year. I think the bonus was for being there at a certain time. Please, I got to look at the contract. But it's not like there was some mysterious change from what I'm seeing now. Now, keep that in mind. Going forward into the budget for the year in question, the proposed budget, obviously, if that was a one-time bonus, we have to make sure that, you know, the proper number was put in there for the, and it may have been put in there inadvertently, and maybe Slobodan saw something or whatever. But I think there's definitely an answer for it, okay? And again, if I just have the contract or if I sit down with Steve when I'm down there, it should be easy to explain. Hopefully, if it was a one-time bonus when the proposed budget was put together inadvertently, please, maybe hopefully they had the right number there, and I want to check that. All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
That's kind of interesting news, and thank you, John, for looking into that. We have a situation here. Again, this goes back to the conduct of the board of directors. We had a public meeting where a director, and no one challenged him, a director essentially accused the general manager of taking too much money. It's been blasted across newspapers. This is the same old situation. You know, where do I go to get my reputation back? This man's being crucified in media, and it's not right. It's not right.
Thank you, Joe. John, did you find your copy of the letter, or you just want me to go on to the next couple of questions that were
No, I'm just trying to listen. I'm trying to hold on.
I got it in front of me.
Hold on, Monday. Yeah, hold on. I'm calling up. How did this happen? Okay, I actually called up. I got the email from Tom questioning what we just asked. So I'm sure there's answers for it, but there might have been something inadvertent in the proposed budget. Maybe the wrong number was picked up inadvertently. Let me just look into that. I wish I was down there right now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one, Gene. Please help me out here.
Yeah, that was the banquets that have been booked. Tom Staus is saying.
Okay, yeah, I got it. I got that one. Okay, so, you know, I think I heard Joe at the beginning. I couldn't hear all of it. I think he was addressing it, but it definitely needs to be addressed. I did send an email to one board member to discuss it a little more. During the budget process, it was, I guess the GM brought forward, and it's fine, it's his right. He brought forward a budget that was basically the same as this year. At least with this year, it is going to be forecasted at the yacht club. That's, you know, that's his right or whatever. So in there, since we didn't have any banquets this year, there is then no banquets next year. And somebody told me there was 18 contracts signed. Again, inadvertently, I was there Saturday night at the yacht club enjoying the half-price prime rib. Matt came over, saw me across the room, came over, said hello, just of course the conversation with a lot of people around and everything. I said to him, I heard you have 18 contracts. I think what he told me, with a lot of people talking, was there was possibly 36 contracts signed. Okay, fine. We're going to look into that, but let's take a step back in the sense that during the budget process, I did ask, Budget and Finance asked, can we get a operating profit on those contracts? And the GM said he didn't have it. So, okay, that's fine. So, you know, something that can be discussed. I certainly wouldn't put it against the deficit recovery, but I would use Frank Daly's term to earmark it when I said that if we do recognize these, this operating profit or this revenue or whatever, let's make sure it gets earmarked against the deficit recovery so we don't use it for something else. That is what I believe the board agreed on at that point. So that's where we're at. If you go back in September when we were giving guidance, with all the hype and everything that I was hearing, that we were all hearing from the yacht club and all favorable stuff, I could have come up with an assumption, which is, you know, it's possible that, hey, we might make 25, 50,000 more at the yacht club. And, you know, we figure that in when we do the budget this year. We didn't, but look, we didn't because as of now, it hasn't happened. So that one's a tough one. It's definitely being discussed. I am discussing it with a board member. I can understand the question, but that was the assumption that the GM took. Certainly is right. And I think earmarking, use Frank's term, which goes along with what I was saying, let's put, if we do recognize anything there on the banquets, let's first put it against the deficit recovery for next year. This way that money's not used somewhere else. That's the best I can say right now.
John O'Connor here. One of the things we have to do on this subject is find out what the contract we have with the Ort Company is, because I believe there was someone mentioned that the 2-year contract has to have the budget the same as it was last year. So if nothing else, we may adjust the budget, but we may have to make adjustments in regard to any kind of bonuses to Matt Ort at the end of the next fiscal year. But we should, someone's got to review the contract.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if that's what it says in the contract, that is what we received. And like I said from the beginning when I started talking, that's the GM's right. And if it wasn't a contract, that's definitely the way to go. And again, we'll earmark it, which he agreed with and everybody agreed with. So I think we're moving in the right direction. So hopefully we make the money there. Everybody happy. Okay.
With regard to the yacht club budget, there are two different issues here, actually. One is a contractual issue, and the other is what are we going to make or lose at the yacht club? In terms of the budget, the important issue is not the contract, but so much as it is what do we expect to make or lose? So someone's brought up the issue, as John addressed it, we have so many functions going on upstairs, whatever they may be. That's only a part of a $1.6 million or so revenue generator. I'm at a loss as to why the board is not asking our manager there to give us a budget of his realistic expectations of what's going to happen there financially in our coming fiscal year. To simply say the contract says the budget will be the same as last year, that's for computation of his bonus. We need a budget from Matt Ort telling Ocean Pines Association what his expectations are for this coming year. And I don't think we have it.
Joe, you said when you say the coming year, you're right. You're talking about the 1920, right?
Yeah, this coming fiscal year.
Yeah, the budget we're in right now, the budget we're discussing.
Right. So I agree.
Do you have?
We asked for that. He didn't have it. We asked to have Matt Ort there. And that's fine. It says right. I'm just trying to answer the question. So I don't disagree with you. I'd like to see that, and I hope we do get it. And I hope somebody who has the authority reaches out to Matt Ort and definitely requests that, because I certainly have sent an email asking that.
And John, you certainly, as a treasurer and a chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee, have the authority or the right to suggest and advise the board of directors to get that budget.
And Joe, I did send that email. I might as well tell you, I did send that email. Yes, and I am speaking to two people about it. But I agree with you. I do have the authority to do that, yes, and I have sent the email. There's other factors here that I want to make sure I do it the right way.
The next item on Tom's letter, well, it was talking about getting more data from Matt Ort about the P&L, what he expects. The next item after that was, why was the Public Works Department budget adjusted downward by $7,000?
Okay. You got that one, or you want me to do that one too?
Well, I believe that that was what actually the GM said he could live with a $7,000 reduction. There was other reductions suggested by Public Works beyond that, but he said he did not think that he, as a general manager, could go with the cuts. He wanted to have the cut limited to about $7,000, so that's what we used. And that's what the board agreed to, because they asked him specifically Saturday, tell us what you can live with, and that was the $7,000 rather than the larger number.
Right. And Gene, you're doing fine. I'm just trying to pull the work papers in the handout, so you're right. So I'm just trying to find it on here, because the GM did do a reconciliation on it, and I actually just got there. So just give me a second. I'm looking at it. I see that he had a disagree. I don't want to call it disagree. He had a different number, and I'm trying to see if he gave the reason. I did hear it because I was sitting next to him on Saturday. I'm just trying to find it in his record. He did do a good reconciliation on there. But he felt that it was Jim concurs with total reduction, so, but not by line item. Jim does not concur, 27,000 maintenance. Look, he didn't agree with it, so I guess Public Works had some recommendations. He agreed with some, but not all of it. That's his prerogative. If you go back to his handout on Saturday, I believe there's some type of explanation in blue on the handout.
I see. There's something about the increase in there's a lack of maintenance cycle in some items in the, or signage in the community. He wants to catch it up. And
right. So the GM did address it, I believe, on Saturday.
Yeah.
Maybe Tom just missed it listening to the video.
Yeah, it looks like this. And this looks like part of a deferred maintenance catch-up that was maybe somebody was saying they would cut, but he wants it back in. He wants to get it done.
Right. Right. I also think that the 5,000 difference was on the rec. So I don't know if when he was listening to the video, he might have mixed up the two. So, but there was a difference on the recreation schedules of reductions that the GM and I guess the person that prepared it were different, but the GM has it all listed there. And right now I'm just going to go with what the GM says.
Yeah, yeah. The last, wait a minute, make sure it's the last one. Yeah, the last.
Could I comment on that $7,000 number? We're talking here a $13 million item, and we're debating 88 cents a year on the assessment. Give me a break.
Yeah, I'm just saying this.
I know, I'm not.
And I'm
just tailing the facts.
Yeah.
You asked the question, we answered.
Yeah, no, and Staus's last item on the inquiry was about moving to an 80-20 split in health premiums in the fiscal 20 year, and he's questioning, is it fair to assessment paying property owners to offset that 20% premium that the employees will have to pay for the first year? He's questioning whether it's fair to do that. And I guess our response would be the board thinks it is fair.
Fair to who?
He doesn't think it's fair to the property.
Fair to the residents.
For the residents.
Okay.
John, you have any?
So, yeah, so this is the best I can do on this from BNF standpoint is this, that even last year when we were, the question came up about the benefits being the best around and everything, what I said back then, it's on the video, it's the same guidance we gave this year, is you have to look at the whole package. You have to look at the pay scale, benchmark it, KPI, whatever, just like what Jeff was saying, same thing with the benefits. And it has to be looked at as one package. That was the whole idea this year, was to have the pay study and to bring everything in line. At this point, from what I remember in the meetings and whatever, was that the board was saying we would go to 80-20. Mm-hmm. But they are holding off on the payroll adjustment for the reasons they stated in the board meeting. And the question comes up, well, if we don't know where to pay study, whether or not they're paid properly or whatever, and to ease into something like this, that there would be some type of lump sum, one-time deal or whatever for the board to decide or the GM to decide to ease into that reduction in benefits while we still try to get a proper payroll study. I think what I heard on Saturday was that the board was leaning towards or saying the 80-20, right? And
yeah,
the payroll adjustment was out, right? There's still the merit of 2%. That's different from the payroll adjustment
right.
from the study. That was out. The lump sum, Gene, do you remember? I gave you some notes or whatever. Was that in or out?
I thought that was still in. I thought that was still in.
Yeah, so did I. I've seen so many different emails and stuff, but and that was still in, right? So that's where it is. Obviously, it's up to the board to decide. That's the rationale. The guidance from BNF is this. The entire package, and we gave that guidance over a year ago, the entire package needs to be looked at. And obviously, if the board wants to make the decision to go to 80-20 to get this rolling, then the question comes up on whether or not you give some type of relief, whatever it is, or maybe you don't. But that should be addressed, and I think that's where they are now.
Yes, I agree. And I prefaced the remarks to the audience at the very beginning, before you were online, that we can answer, we will try to answer a lot of the process questions, but whether or not an amount is correct or fair, or what somebody disagrees with this amount or that amount, that's more or less the purview of the board. And we can't necessarily make those kind of calls that it's fair.
Right now, I'm just thinking back, Gene. I'm just thinking back. I believe it was a gentleman earlier when he was asking about how do you go from 127 to 0, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, here's an example. I'm not pointing at anybody. Okay, everybody. Let's look at the whole process. If this is something that had been decided during the year, which was addressed and debated and analyzed and reviewed, obviously, I know in my world that I came from, we would have something like this done before this stage. And when you have something like this that's still being debated, or whatever terms you all want to use at any level or anybody, not pointing at anybody, anything or anything, then you're going to have that situation where, that increase, that number is going to change around.
Yes.
This one topic affects the, the budget and eventually the assessment right now in a big way.
John?
Again, I'm not pointing anywhere, anything, yes.
If you can explain again, it seems to me right now are we paying 100% of the health premiums? And the board, are you saying the board is talking about dropping that to 80-20? So they're gonna expect the employees to overnight, you have to pay 20% of this premium. So you said something about a lump sum, John. So what did you mean?
Yeah, so no, that's a good question to tie it all together. So right. So remember, my first guidance was, and we'll work from there to answer your question. The guidance was, hey, if the board is deciding or somebody's deciding that our benefits are the highest in the land. And when you're paying 100%, or you're paying it as an employer, odds are you're going to be in, you know, whether you call it the first quartile or the fourth quartile, whatever, when you get back to benchmarking and all that, you're going to be probably one of the best employers with benefits. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. So they want to try to make that more in line with market, which from a guidance standpoint, absolutely makes total sense, as long as everybody's payroll and everything else is in line with everywhere else. So that's why we hope to have a payroll study, and eventually we will, where you make sure everybody's paid right, and then your benefits and everything is in line. If you're going to make that adjustment for the benefits and somebody still feels that the payroll is not, well, we don't know what it is, then there would be a lump sum, because there was all different situations I heard on this, but the lump sum would be a one-shot deal. So if I was somebody that now all of a sudden I was going to get hit with that, maybe just pure example, don't know if these numbers work out, that I would have to pay $3,000 for my medical benefits and all that. There's some type of assistance that the employer gives to ease through that transition. I've seen this with many companies. I probably lived it myself back in the 90s, where then you give them this lump sum. It doesn't get increased into their salary, which I heard people saying, but again, they can do that. I certainly never seen it that way. I would rather see the payroll study and a payroll adjustment to get everybody to market. So yes, they're talking about a lump sum to offset that $3,000 in my example. There's different ways they can do it. They can do it as a range this year, maybe give them a %.
Right.
So that's the answer. Yeah, I believe they answered your question, but we don't know yet what they've decided.
Okay. Well, also, they could probably gradually take that increase, like go to 10%, and then the next couple of years go to 20, but that's awful drastic. So I'm glad you're talking about a lump sum or something.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yes, and that's definitely an option too, and an option that was discussed, that was even discussed last year, was, you know, take it down 90-10 and then 80-20 this year. I guess they didn't make that decision. What I'm saying is some type of decision needs to, you know, be brought forth here. Yeah. And then another decision on, you know, on what we do about that. So yes, that's where I think they are right now.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak on behalf of the employees because no one else is.
You was. We were.
The employees did not set the 100% payment of their health care costs. It was an offering made by the Ocean Pines Association to the employees when they were hired. I don't know what the deal they're going to try to work out, and I'm not saying that 80-20 is unfair. But we have people working for us who were hired on the basis of 100%. And what this one-shot deal may mean or not, I don't know. But just look at the interest of fairness. Let's say it costs $1,000 a year for insurance, just to pick a number, or $1,000 a month, I'm sorry. That'd be $12,000 a year. You're going to ask an employee to pick up 20% of that. That's $2,400 out of that employee's pocket. Now, I don't know what the one-shot deal is planned to be. Suppose you gave them $2,400. Next year, they're still out $2,400 out of their base pay. I don't know what the answer is, but if I were an employee, you know, I'm not necessarily going to go looking for another job, but I'm not going to be very happy about it. And I believe that any employees that aren't happy about it are justified in not being happy about it. And I think that those of you who have been in business know that unhappy employees don't always do the best work. And we have an obligation to these people, I believe. And to say it's unfair to association members is unfair to everything, because the board of directors, the representatives of the association members, gave this benefit to those employees. And to now say that it's unfair to association members, I believe is incorrect. We need to be fair with these people. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And in some, I think what John Viola is trying to impress with the board, since they've eliminated the pay study increases that were intended to bring the salaries to market, and then the 80-20 split is supposed to bring the health care benefit payments to market. If you don't do both of them at the same time, it's probably unfair. So since they've eliminated these pay study adjustments where some of the salaries, where people were going to be brought into market, not all of them, some of them are at market, then it's only fair to at least this transition year to go ahead in fiscal 19, give them that lump sum that represents the amount they'll have to be paying, and hopefully have the pay study adjustments done by the time the next fiscal year rolls around. You have okay, Jeff.
Joe makes an excellent point. I have not heard in any discussion of this anything other than the 80-20 number. And I think it makes a huge difference whether the 20% that we're going to ask employees to pick up is $500 a year or $5,000 a year or worse. And I haven't seen anyone discuss that number. So before we trip down the path and shove that expense over to them, we need to know what it is, employee by employee or on an average basis or something, so that we can figure out if this is a catastrophic hit for their personal budget or whether it's a yawn. Who cares? I don't know which it is. My guess is it's not a yawn, but I don't know. So I think we ought to do that work, encourage the board to look at it that way, and let's get some of those numbers out there so that we know what this is actually going to do. And I also believe the point that said the salary and the benefits go together, and we keep now talking about doing this. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna skip the pay, but we're gonna cut the benefits. We're not looking at the whole package, and we all keep telling ourselves that's what we need to do. We need to look at the whole package. Well, let's do that, and let's figure it out. Thank you.
John.
Right. Yep, and that,
John, hold on a minute.
and that's been our guidance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
This subject is like deja vu. We went through this last year, and the board decided to do nothing and put it off till this year. I agree. I mean, like, the dollar amounts are very significant, and there are other avenues to level this out, and that is just to charge them for any increase in premiums from year to year, as opposed to jumping to 80-20 right away, or to ease into the 80-20 with a 90-10 and so forth. So yeah, I think you're right. Again, this is at least the second year this subject has come up. And if the board does nothing, we'll be into the third year. But they have to at least address it and get the information right.
Right. And that's why I'm saying, looking at it now, if this needs to be decided now, obviously it would have been better all year long. But, this way it's a reality to the employees, whether it's 90-10, 80-20, whatever, and then you give them a lump sum, that kind of helps it. But it's unfortunate that we all, and I'm going to say everybody, I'm not pointing at anybody or anything or any team or committee or board or whatever. It's unfortunate that we're at this situation at this time of the year during this budget process trying to figure it out. So, you got to take everything into play here. I'm just going to move to get the charger for my PC.
Okay.
In case I don't hear you.
That's okay. All right. I have one other email that was sent to Ocean Pines about 9 p.m. last night from a Mr. Thomas O'Doherty. He mentions that he and his wife just moved into Ocean Pines about 3 years ago, and they have been unable to attend monthly meetings, but they had questions regarding the upcoming budget. The first question they had was related to the payroll study, and is this he questions whether or not this is a necessary expense, and for Mr. Thomas O'Doherty, I will draft an email to go back to him. The $128,000 has been eliminated from the recommended budget, and that equated to about a $15 increase in the assessments per property owner. His next question was, he states that it's very rare for companies to pay 100% for employee health benefits, and he thinks it's detrimental, or it has been proven to be detrimental to most companies. He said, I would propose that this contribution be implemented gradually over the next 3 years, eventually topping at 20%, something like that's an option that Jeff and John Viola and others have talked about. But right as now, as I understand it, the OPA board is proposing to make the shift to 80-20 starting May 1st in this upcoming fiscal year. And his last question is regards to merit raises. And he said, I believe everybody needs to get a raise based on performance. Most companies, unless you're part of a union, most employees should be evaluated based on performance. My wife works at a university where yearly increases are based on input from her superiors as well as self-reflection of past performance. And I'm concerned that employees are being overpaid for positions that don't require such a salary, especially if you're paying for health benefits. Annual salaries should be in line with similar positions in the industry. And he goes on to say these are difficult decisions that affect a lot of people. However, for the fiscal health of Ocean Pines and in the best interest of the association, it is in the best interest to make employees pay a portion of their benefits. So again, this has been addressed. We're going to go to, as it stands now, the board, based on the recommended budget, is proposing an 80-20 shift starting May 1st. And we do have also in the budget for to inform Mr. O'Doherty, as was mentioned earlier in this meeting, we have about $73,000 in the proposed recommended budget, which is set aside as a merit increase pool from which merit increases would be given to those employees whose performance those who performance merit a merit increase. And so I thank Mr. O'Doherty for his letter, and we will get back to you with a letter. Given that it's 11 o'clock, time is up. They are having another whatever in this room. If somebody has a quick question, I'll hang around to try to entertain your question. But
Thank you, Gene. Thank you.
John, do you have any closing comment?
So just one, Gene. First of all, thank you for everybody for coming, as well as the BNF team. Gene, if you can gauge everybody, see if this was good, if it's something we should continue to do, I think we should, and how we can improve it or whatever. But I would like BNF to continue doing this in some capacity.
Okay. And to add on to that, our meetings, our regular meetings, are always open to the public. I believe, John, is next Wednesday at 8:30 at the admin building conference room is our regular.
Correct. That was the day I was told that we would receive the controller reports, I did send out emails last week, so that should be, hopefully it's on the calendar. But right, it's the Wednesday, the 27th.
It's the
Okay,
fourth Wednesday of every month,
yeah,
basically.
supposedly. And I want
Well,
No?
yeah, sometimes
Okay.
it is, depends on.
Maybe.
But as I said at the beginning, I
we're
thank.
we try to work with the finance lead when it will be done, and as close to the 13th workday as possible.
As I said at the beginning of the meeting before we started, I'd really thank the people that did show up, because it's really, I would have been heartbroken if nobody showed up. But if you in the audience, do you feel like something like this to be done periodically, or particularly, I guess, around budget time, would to have an open back and forth session with the committee is appropriate? I apologize for, we were supposed to have handouts. I requested handouts, but I believe because of the holiday yesterday, they did not materialize. I went over to try to get some. I was told they thought they were made. I couldn't get to the person who had done it. They were in a closed session meeting, and I apologize that we did not have a handout. But thank you.
Right. So the board on Saturday asked the GM to have it ready for them sent to them by Wednesday, which is tomorrow. So that could be part of it.
Yeah.
And that's also why with the controllers reporting, I know some people are asking me. They have a lot going on, just trying to work within their schedule. Okay.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
John, you want to stick around on the speakerphone, or do you have anything else?
If you want me to, that's fine. If you want me to. Otherwise, I'm good.
I think, what about, I'm going to cut this off. We're off. I want to make sure we're not being recorded now. Are we down, sir?
Cut it?